In this story, a murder case would unfold and lead to an infamous curse that would claim lives over 200 years later. Let's go. In North Yorkshire, England in the late 1600s, lived a man named Thomas Busby. Thomas, the local inn owner, was a known thief and alcoholic with a hot temper. Thomas was newly married to Elizabeth Awity, whom he loved dearly. Elizabeth, who was no stranger to criminal life, was the daughter of a petty thief named Daniel Awity. Daniel had recently moved to the area and decided to buy a secluded farm he would come to name Danotty Hall. He purchased this specific farm near a town called Kirby Whiskey. The farm was a place where he could continue illegal activities under the radar of the local authorities. The inn owned by Thomas was just 3 miles away from Danotty Hall. After marrying Elizabeth, Thomas would become partners with Daniel, and they would both participate in Thomas's illegal coining operations. Coining back then was the process of stamping, or minting metal coins. They would use this process to make counterfeit coins. Thomas would go to and from Danotty Hall during the night to help Daniel make coins they could use in town. Though they were partners, they didn't seem to like one another and would constantly get into huge fights. They fought about the business, Thomas' alcoholism, and the way he treated Elizabeth. Just about anything. Eventually, Daniel had enough and he didn't want anything to do with Thomas anymore. He was tired of him constantly being drunk and not showing up to the farm to do his part. So Daniel decided that his coin operation just wouldn't work with Thomas as a partner. He decided he needed to end their partnership, and he needed to end it soon. One night, on his way home, Thomas decided to stop at his favorite drinking spot, the inn. He planned on getting really drunk, something he was known for doing around town. He walked in eager to start his night of drinking. As he walked in, everyone was looking at him with wide eyes, as if they were concerned for Thomas. Thomas, now puzzled, started looking around the pub looking for any clue as to why everyone seemed so concerned. At first, he didn't know what to make of it. As he is looking around the room, his gaze stops at a corner of the pub, and that's when things take a turn for the worse. Because when Thomas's eyes had stopped scanning the room, he suddenly fixated on this one corner. His facial expression changed from puzzled to furious. The people in the pub could see the transition in Thomas's demeanor. His face turned red, and his expression went from puzzled to furious as he started aggressively walking over to the thing he was fixated on. That thing would be a man sitting in his favorite chair. That man was Daniel Awity, Thomas's crime partner. See, everyone in that part of town knew that you do not sit in Thomas's favorite chair. Thomas was known for fighting anyone who dared disrespect him by sitting in that one spot he called his own. So when Daniel made it to the inn, he planned on telling Thomas that they are no longer in business together, and he is there to take his daughter back to Danotty Hall. So when he got to the inn and didn't see Thomas, he decided he was going to wait in Thomas's favorite chair. Daniel, who already didn't like Thomas, knew that this would make him furious and sat in it to let Thomas know how serious he was. Daniel, now sitting with an angry Thomas standing in front of him, would begin shouting at Thomas, "I'm here to take my daughter home. I don't ever want to see your face on my farm again." Over the next couple of days, there was a growing concern in the town because no one had seen or heard from Daniel, including his daughter. No one dared ask Thomas if he knew where Daniel was, in fear that they too might make Thomas angry. So the locals decided to form a party and search the area near Danotty Hall. They searched for Daniel at his home, but he wasn't there, so the next logical place would be his farm. Daniel wasn't at his farm either. The search continued in the woods surrounding Daniel's farm, and as they climbed through the woods hoping to find any sign of Daniel, that is when they saw it. The lifeless body of Daniel Awity. The corpse was badly beaten, and Daniel had succumbed to his wounds. This is what happened on the night of the argument at the inn. At some point in the argument between Thomas and Daniel, Thomas became enraged at Daniel for coming to his inn, sitting in his favorite chair, and threatening to take his wife. He grabbed Daniel and physically threw him out of the pub. Daniel would get up, dust himself off, and return to his home 3 miles away. Meanwhile, Thomas would continue drinking heavily that night. He had hoped that a few beers would calm him down. He would go home and sleep it off. The next day, he and Daniel would be back to their usual activity. Instead, Thomas just got more and more angry with every sip. Later that night, Thomas would show up at Daniel's home even more angry than before. This time, there would be no argument. Daniel, surprised to see Thomas again, and at his home, was gearing up for another argument, but was instead met with a hammer to the head. Earlier that night, Thomas decided that the disrespect was not something he would let go of, and grabbed a hammer on his way out of the inn's pub, and in his drunken rage hit Daniel repeatedly until his body was limp and lifeless. Once he was done, Thomas dragged Daniel's body out to the nearby woods where he attempted to cover up his crime. When Daniel's body was found by the local search party, everyone knew immediately who committed this crime. The local authorities were contacted, and Thomas was arrested. Thomas would never see freedom again, but this would not be his last victim. In 1702, a few years later, Thomas was tried and convicted for the murder of Daniel. His punishment would be death by hanging, and his body would be dipped in tar so his remains could later be displayed near the inn. This was a common punishment for criminals who were convicted of serious offenses back then. While Thomas sat in prison waiting to be executed, he was granted a last wish. Thomas would ask to have a beer while sitting in his favorite chair at his own inn. His wish was granted, and Thomas was allowed to sit and enjoy a large pint before being hanged. After finishing his beer, Thomas was escorted across the street to a platform where he would soon be hanged. As he stood on the platform, Thomas shouted one last thing. He made a promise that anyone who dared sit in his favorite chair would die a horrible death. Even beyond the grave, he would find a way to make sure no one sat in his favorite chair. After his final words, he was hanged. His words are later known as the Busby stoop chair curse, or dead man's chair. A curse that would kill anyone who sat in the chair. But that isn't where this story ends. After Thomas's execution, the inn would eventually have new owners. They would change the name of the inn to Busby Stoop Inn and store Thomas's chair down in the basement for safe measure. Over the years, the inn became a famous tourist attraction, bringing in people from all over the world. Even though the inn owner made sure to take precautions, people would fall victim to the curse even after Thomas's death. All the way up to the 1970s, almost 300 years later, the chair was responsible for at least 9 more known deaths related to people who dared sit in his chair, including a bricklayer contracted to do work on the inn. He sat in the chair on break and later fell to his death. A roofer fell through the roof of the pub after sitting in the chair. A woman who accidentally tripped and fell into Thomas's chair would later suffer a brain aneurysm. A delivery driver crashed his van 1 hour after coming in contact with the chair. After all the deaths related to the chair, the landlord decided that enough was enough and removed the chair altogether. It was eventually donated to the Thirsk Museum in North Yorkshire, England, where it hangs on the wall so no one else can fall victim to the curse. If you had the chance, would you sit in Thomas's chair? Well, that's all for this one. Hope you enjoyed this story. Be sure to leave us a comment below. If you enjoyed this story and you haven't already, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Thanks for watching. I'm out.